Hello and welcome to another episode of the CAGED Canary podcast. I'm your host, Mahdi The before Magic, and today we wanted to talk about curated content. In Magic, there's around 15,000 different books, pamphlets, booklets printed, written on the subject of magic. There's probably more. And this is obviously a huge amount of written work. Then, when you take into account all the videos, all the DVDs, all the VHS cassettes, all the recordings that we have of magic performances and magic explanations, all the newspaper articles, the magazines, the periodicals, it adds up. It adds up very quickly. And it's overwhelming because we each have a limited amount of time that we can spend on magic, and we clearly cannot digest every single thing in magic. So that's where curation comes in. And curation is simply choosing what it is that you are going to consume. There's many ways to do this, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the ways that I use. So, the most obvious and probably best way to curate content is to ask for recommendations. If you have friends in magic, even if you don't have friends in magic, there are a few titles that are recommended more than others. These are titles that anybody in magic has heard of: The Expert at the Card Table, Royal Road to Card Magic, The Memoirs of Robert Houdin, for instance, so on and so forth. There are a number of classic works in magic that are very often recommended, and they're recommended because most people in magic have read them and have gotten something out of them. The problem is, if you have everybody reading the same things, is every single other magician knows what it is that you're reading. They're familiar with the material that you're performing with, so you don't want to just go on the most basic curated material. I would say read the recommended books first to develop a foundation. Most of them are excellent titles. You can look at, there are many people who have made top lists of literature and magic. My friend Ricky Smith wrote a very good one, I believe, a few years ago for the Art of Magic website. That was Dan and Dave's magic website a while back. And there have been many magicians who have written recommended reading lists, and most of them are pretty good. Forget where I was going with that, but it's a good place to start to develop a foundation. You want to start there, develop your foundation, and then continue. And then you will look into different things. Maybe you're focused on a trick, so you can go on either askalexander.org or Conjuring Credits, and you can do some research on a plot. Maybe it's oil and water, maybe it's triumph, maybe it's whatever you want it to be. You type in that trick or the author of that trick, and you start doing research on it. And that is another way to curate the information that you are consuming. One of my favorite ways to curate information that I consume is I will choose a magician. For example, choose a magician like Arturo Ascanio, and I'll read all his work, and then I'll read the work that he has inspired, because he's inspired many great magicians. People have worked on his magic and have published their variations of his material, and that is a great way to look at material. And they'll also look, more importantly, the guys who have inspired Arturo Toscanio, for example, Fred Capps, uh, John Carls, Okito, Fu Manchu. I think it's Fu Manchu that. Is it Okito or Fu Manchu? One of those magicians inspired Arturo Toscanio. I think it was Fu Manchu, not Okito. Anyways, the point is, you do research on those magicians, and you can learn about them. You learn about their material. It's very interesting because then you see the evolution of plots. One of the classic examples is Arturo Toscanio's La Dama Inquieta, which is a great card trick. If you look at the history of that, and he talks about it in his writings, it goes back to Fred Capps, and then it goes back even before Fred Capps to, I believe, a routine by possibly Tenkai. I'm not too sure, but there was a Asian routine that was very similar to that inspired that routine. So when you look back at all these magicians, you can find a very clear line for their inspirations if you pay attention to the writing. You pay attention to the magicians who have inspired them and the books that have inspired them. You can draw these lines back into magic. That's how I personally like to curate magic. Another thing that I do is I look at lineage. For example, I look at a guy like Harry Houdini. Who was he inspired by? And I research those magicians, Keller, for instance, and so forth, Robert Houdin. And you can see those lines of magicians who have inspired other magicians, how they take their tricks and their ideas and their concepts and they breathe totally new life into them. And that is how I look at curation. That's how I think we should be curating content. Another thing that I do, or I'm trying to do, it's not exactly practical, but my idea is that I only want to have books on my shelf that I absolutely love. I only want things in my house that inspire me, that I love and I adore. And many magic books that I've owned throughout the years have not invoked these feelings in me. I've learned maybe a decent trick or two from this book and that book, but they don't really hold a special place in my heart, so I don't want to keep them. I just don't want to have a big collection of books for the sake of it. I don't feel like, and maybe I'm wrong to say this, I don't feel like I need that bulk of information in my life because so much of it is accessible to me in other ways. It's obviously great to have a huge library, that way you can look at different things, but I never wanted to have a huge library. I just wanted to have a very small working library, highly curated to the magic that I love, and then if I want to access outside information, I have friends who have much, much bigger collections than I do and resources online that allow me to do that. And if none of those work, let's say I can't find the research online, it's not up on Ask Alexander or Conjuring Credits, or nobody I know owns the book, I can probably trace that book down and either borrow a copy from a library, or I can just buy that book and consume that information, and then afterwards either resell that book if I don't want to keep it, or I can keep the book. The point is, I want to have a very curated collection. I don't want a huge collection. I want to be able to talk passionately about every single book that's on my shelf, about everything that I that I own, I want it to inspire me, and I want, when I'm surrounded by it, for it to be just a constant meditation on what it is that I'm doing. That is my goal in curation. Curation for me is about inspiration. It's about learning, expanding ideas, but it's the opposite of just consuming things unfiltered. And I have consumed things unfiltered. I have at different times gone through different subjects that I've been interested in, and I'll go to a library and take out every single book on the subject, and I'll just read them all. It doesn't matter to me if it's a good book or bad book, just because I'm trying to learn as much as possible. And it's probably a horrible way to learn things. It's just sort of my method. But the good thing about it is, once I process a bulk of information, I can then make distinctions as to what I'm interested in reading or not. And I've sort of done that naturally, that natural process in magic throughout the years. And if I go to a shop and see a book on the shelf, many times I'm not interested in the book because I know that it doesn't suit me. I just know that the material doesn't suit me, the style doesn't suit me. I can just look at the title and the author and get a sense of what is in that book. And I really try to align what I'm reading and what I'm studying to my tastes. And that has helped me tremendously in creating my own style, having my own structural conception of magic, building my own structural conception of magic. And I believe that it can also help you. So I would recommend curating your collection and studying it from there. I'm sorry that this is a short episode, but I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will be speaking to you very shortly. Thank you for listening. Goodbye. Goodbye.